And on the side here, Brady, am I still okay?
Well, it doesn't matter.
I'm out now?
You're, if you go back in.
So we need to stand in this circle here. So where would you like me to go? Should I stay, I want to stay out of the way, when you're talking, just let me know, you're the boss.
I'm gonna call you.
I'm ready. Okay.
No, right, of course. Cool. Good looking guys. So welcome everybody. We're gonna start here in just a few minutes. A few more people are coming in. Wait. Just a few minutes here before we start off our presentation. Hi, Tony. Ready? Daisy. Well, gentlemen, who in the audience, we'll get started. This was presented just so. No, we wanted to have another opportunity to be able to have public come in. So we appreciate you doing that. So we've had a slide presentation. We're going to go through to highlight some of the issues, that we're having in terms of why we're going to referendum. So we're going to start off with in terms of one thing to remember is that an operating referendum in Wisconsin is really a requirement of most schools to balance their budget. And as you'll see through this presentation, this is a revenue issue more than it is an expenditure issue. And it's essentially about how the school or the state is funding schools or not. So we'll present with this in terms of working through. So let's move into the slides. So when I just mentioned that, what we have here is approximately over 80% of the schools in Wisconsin at some point in time are going for operating referendum to balance their budget. And that essentially is talking about funding 10% to 15% or more of their budget. That's the only means for them to balance that budget. Our budget, for example, in our general operations is about $73 million. When we look at special education in terms of what we get some direct funding, we're up to about $90 to $91 million. So that's the size of our operation.
So the top 7 reasons why we need funding. We are very committed to student opportunities. We want to maintain a wide range of academic and extracurricular programs and services for our students, teachers, and staff. We want to be able to retain and attract quality staff to make the quality education happen. Student achievement, Jim will touch on this more in connection with our strategic goal, but we are deeply committed to high standards for student achievement. Educational technology, as we look at our budget, education and the curriculum, or educational technology and our curriculum are areas where we have great needs. We have outdated equipment, outdated curriculum, and our plan is to do this referendum to also put us on a better path overall to better fund the ongoing replacement of devices and a regular replacement and review of our curriculum. Safe and healthy facilities. We want to increase our annual maintenance and smaller school projects. This is simply because our current operational budget only funds about $250,000 for capital improvements annually. So for a school district our size and the number of buildings that we have, our goal would be to eventually get that to $1.2 million, to be 1 to 2% of our budget. So through this referendum, we're trying to make progress towards that goal. And so $500,000 additional was added in this over the 5 years to fund additional capital improvement projects and work towards making more of an impact if we have extensive building needs. And then social, emotional, mental health through COVID. Families have experienced great challenges as students, and we want to be able to better support them through that with this funding.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, as we look in terms of why we're looking at an operating deficit, this is where I opened it up in terms of this is more of a revenue issue or problem than it is an expenditure one. So starting off, first of all, is to recognize that, Manitowoc Public Schools is a low-funded and low-tax school district. And you'll see this in some of the other charts that we'll have here that will follow. But essentially, if we are just looking within our county, the schools that are in this county, everyone above us is receiving more per pupil than we are. If we had that same level of funding, we would be having an additional $7 million to $17 million more. And I think that just reflects the inequity in the state's mechanism for funding the schools. The state funding has not kept up with inflation. So at one point in time in the past, the state put in revenue ceilings or caps in terms of how much school districts could raise without going to their taxpayers and asking for more. And when they did that, they also did that with the understanding that they would raise that ceiling to somewhat parallel inflation and sometimes even more. And so when they were doing this, we were not having the challenges that we're having now. But what happened was they stopped raising those revenue ceilings. And what's happened is we've fallen so far behind now. If they had kept up, we would have 3,200 hours more per pupil than we do right now, or about $16 million. And so if you're looking at that, we're currently right under $14,000. We would have 3,200 hours more. We wouldn't even have an issue. We wouldn't be going out for a referendum if we had those resources. 2-year state aid freeze. What was important as Angela had identified in terms of when COVID hit, the federal government also provided some emergency relief funds. And in providing those emergency relief funds, which is about $12.5 million over approximately a 4-year period of time, we're ending down on that. We'll be spending them, into next year. But what happened when the state recognized that we were receiving some of these funds, they stopped increasing our per pupil increase that they typically would consider. And so, for example, if they had given us $200 each year for the last 2, we would have $2 million more. But they didn't. Now, what we didn't do necessarily at that time was identifying that our costs were exceeding what revenues we had in our operating referendum. But with this $12.5 million coming in from the federal government, kind of masked our situation. So some people are thinking, geez, you just have this problem now. You've got an increased load of expenditures, when in fact we've had this problem probably for 3 years back, where if there wasn't federal dollars, we would have been asking for an additional referendum because we were falling that far behind, largely because of inflation now. When we were in inflation, we were at in the 2% area, we're currently about 6.5%. The state provides us estimates of what the inflation amount will be, in terms of what they're projecting so we can build budgets. And they're projecting in July will be 8%. And we build a lot of our budget on 5%. Angela will touch on that. So those are some of the things. But again, what's happening also now is that because we're a little funded, others can entice more staff, to come work for them. So competition becomes an issue. The other thing to recognize is that the way the state system works, we have a couple of things that happen. One is they're identifying that now kids that live in your area could go to a private school, and we have to collect funds for them, but send them to a private school. Also, they could, they're a resident of our area, but they choose a different public school for whatever reason. We have to ask our taxpayers for that money, but we're sending that out. The private schools right now is at $2.5 million, and people who select other public schools is $3 million. So right now, out of that $73 million budget, we've got $5.5 million that we're asking for but sending out. Additionally, we all recognize if there's challenges kids need. We talked about COVID and the need to support our general kids. There's kids who actually need more help, and those are kids sometimes we refer to as needing special services. And that's so recognized that it's actually a mandate that when we evaluate what their services need to be, it's mandated that we provide those services no matter what the cost is. So that's a requirement. Now, in general, if that were to happen, and we say, gee, we need more resources, we would have to cut or find more resources in special education. That has to be funded. So what we have to do out of our general operations money, we have to cover that shortfall, whatever that might be that the state and federal governments, have not kept up with. That right now is at $8 million. So you have these transfers that are going out at $5.5 million, and you got an additional $8 million we are not only having a problem in terms of revenues, but now we're being squeezed, in terms of meeting some state regulations or letting money come in and go out. And again, this just highlights in terms of really why is this referendum important? It's all about the kids. And so you see 3 pictures of kids up there. There's the academics. We got really rich extracurricular activities that really is part of that growth of that of our students. We also have a school forest, where we have wonderful field trips, in terms of being able to, there's a cost associated with all that, but we're really proud of that. That the referendum helps us maintain that. Likewise, we also have some of the most greatest facilities when you look at Lincoln High School, and we're going to be celebrating 100 years there. But what goes with great facilities like that when they're getting older, it's going to cost more to maintain. And as Angela indicated, we're putting a little bit more money in there. But these are some of the things that we're proud of, but it also takes funds to make sure that we're maintaining our facilities and providing the services that our kids need. This kind of recaps a couple of things here. What's listed on here, all those dots are comparable school districts. Those a little bit below us and those a little bit above us. It's not including school districts like Madison or Milwaukee. It's more of those schools that we would see as comparables. On the horizontal line, across the bottom, is the state report card scores. Okay, and so those dots are aligned on the horizontal bar based on how we're doing relative to our comparable school districts. On the vertical line going up is the per pupil funding. Now, what the trend has been nationally over the years is you would see highly in that lower left quadrant that would be highly populated, and then it would typically go up to the upper right quadrant. More money, higher achievement. And actually, you don't see that here. You actually see people with more money, but no better results than what we have. So while money is an issue, it isn't everything. And the thing that I would have to share with you is that we recognize this. And this year, we also launched a strategic plan for the whole purpose of elevating their achievement, because we know we've got the staff to do it. We've identified some critical changes in curriculum. And so we have a plan that not only are we asking for that money to continue operations, but to also convey there's significant amount of improvement that's in their plan too.
So key assumptions, through projecting the budget over the next 5 years, I use many factors to put together the projected budget. And just something I do want to mention in here as well is that our budgets, or just the referendum in general, is over the span of 5 years, which is a departure from the previous referendums. We historically have done 3-year referendums for a flat amount. So what we did this year is we went out for a longer period of time as a result of feedback from the community and staff. There's been a lot of voter fatigue, and so the idea was to work over a longer period of time and do a more intentional, careful, projection over that period of time as well. So for tax assumptions, we use the low equalized value for the land growth. So our land growth was a historic 16.9% last year. Over 40 years, it's been an average of 3.71%. So that extensive growth in land value caused our mill rate to plummet last year. That, along with state aid, which is the other factor that greatly impacts the mill rate, are both things that we received more state aid, and we also had extensive growth in our land value. So over the course of the referendum, they kept this very conservative and kept it at 0 to 2%. 0% for 2 years, I believe, 1 and 2% over the time. Just to be very cautious and not to overestimate land value growth, and that keeps just a safe estimate of the land growth. Revenue assumptions: per pupil increases from the state of $200 over the first 2 years, $100, and then $50 in years 3 or 4 and 5. And so what this speaks to is that through the course of the referendum, we are hopeful and have pretty safe, a safe feeling that we're going to receive some additional per pupil funding. The per pupil funding is really what truly gives us more money as a school district. In the revenue limit, it's a balance of your state aid and your local tax levy. So when we received additional state aid in past years, what it's really meant is property tax relief. we really, in order to make a bigger pie or a bigger amount that we get as a district, we really need additional per pupil revenue. So that's why we put some of those calculations in there to also protect us from passing all of it on to our taxpayers. So that's just saying that, we are planning on receiving this per pupil revenue from the state. If for some reason we do not receive it, what we've projected over some of the years, then we're simply going to have to balance that through our own budgets. So then other budget assumptions just, that are impacted by inflation, especially staff and benefits. 5% for staff compensation over the first year, 3%, and then 2% over the rest of the course of the referendum. Over the last 10, 12 years since Act 10, the WERC rate has been between 1% and 3% on most years, actually more reliably between 1% and 2%. So while we have high inflation right now, and it's at 8% this year, we're going with a 5% increase in the projections, and then assuming that will lower over the course of the referendum. Healthcare increases, we've been very fortunate to have lower increases over the years, and we're self-funded, which really helps us be very responsible and take advantage of the most maximum discounts for our health insurance plan. So that means we're going out to the taxpayers for less through our budgets. Transportation, 2% over the course of the 5 years. Transportation, cost of fuel, that's all has had a heavy impact on inflation. Energy and utility costs, those have had more increases in some areas. So that's between 2 and 20% depending upon utility. And then the additions, as I mentioned before, for facilities is $500,000 additional. Technology infrastructure and then computer replacement plans, those are added as well. And the infrastructure really speaks to just our general backbone of our technology offering, ability to offer high-speed internet. You have to upgrade that equipment every couple of years, every 5 years, in order to keep and maintain a good, just wireless learning opportunities for our students. And then curriculum planning additions to get ourselves on a regular curriculum cycle. So our primary sources of revenue, as I mentioned in this here, it shows our primary source of revenue is from state sources and property taxes. So the state sources are the state aid, and then property taxes make up well over 75% of our revenue. So that again speaks to the fact that really that per pupil income is really, or per pupil increases are critical to growing the revenue that we have as a school district. And while state aid, you've heard that in the news that we received additional state aid, that truly doesn't give us additional funds. It just offsets and provides property tax relief. This goes on to show the comparison of the revenue limit increases in the CPI, which is the consumer price index, the cost of goods sold, how that's been funded over the years. In the early years of the revenue limit, there was a commitment from the state to fund close to the rate of CPI. And they really truly did. If you see the first half of the graph from the left to the right, it shows that they added additional funding in the revenue limit as the CPI adjusted. However, since 2008-9, that's really taken a drastic change in it, and it's not been fully funded by the state. And so that's where districts like low revenue districts like Manitowoc have been able to make it with as a low revenue district for many years. It's becoming increasingly more difficult because it's been many years since this funding hasn't been supported.
And that's where we identified that would be $3,200 more if they had kept that trend up. That was the estimate. That's provided to us in terms of what that revenue would have been if the state had continued that original pattern of increasing by an inflationary amount. And this just we identified also in terms of the inequity in the system. So there's two bar graphs here. The one on the left shows how we compare within our county to other school districts in our county. And this is where we have a spread. If we had the funding level of a school district just above all the way up to Reedsville, which is the top one, we would have an additional $7 to $17 million more. And so those are some of our challenges in terms of when we're going out to our taxpayers to ask them, in terms of passing out a referendum. And we've done this, as Angela said, every 3 years. Now we're moving to 5 to spread this out a little bit and kind of avoid that voter fatigue, so to speak, in terms of how many times are we coming, and it's difficult sometimes for them to understand. But this is the source of balancing the funds, except it's not a level playing field. So in many ways, Manitowoc is being penalized because of this code.
And the tax impact, so over the past 6 years, the MPSD has had a declining rate in the tax, or declining amount in the tax rate. This has been due to increased state aid, property value increases. Those both contribute highly to the, the decrease in the overall mill rate. So, all things staying equal, the taxpayers have received a savings of $340 and a value of a $100,000 home over the last 7 years. And so over the course of the referendum, they would see roughly an increase of $299. So that is a huge, there's been a savings, and they would maintain that savings overall in the grand scheme historically. And we've always seen underneath for the taxpayers, creating a value underneath the state average compared to what other districts or taxpayers pay in other school districts.
And so the dip there, as Angela was speaking before, property values took a spike, which then required less millage than to pay off obligations in terms of what we were asking for. So that's part of the reason that created a dip. Unfortunately, now to bring it back to that same level where we were funding makes, there's a little sticker shock when you look at those price tags. 5.5, to 11, that's where bringing us back to a level that we were at before, where we were previously asking for amounts of $3.4 million as a current. So 4.3, excuse me, got that reversed there a little bit in terms of, and try to recall also when we mentioned that the federal government has essentially been providing this in a means of a funding source for the last 3 years. And so this really surfaced much earlier in this, but we're right now just having to address it.
So looking at the question that is posed on the referendum, so it's asking to exceed the revenue limits for the following amounts over the course of the next few years. And just as, just to kind of recap as well, those that are Manitowoc would know this historically, this is really in a way a reasonable. The 4.3 million is in effect until next year. So that's why we are only asking for 5.2 additional to bring it up to a total of $9.5 million for the 23-24 year. So because the 4.3 is already approved, we only have to approve a new amount. So that's why there is a little bit of an extensive jump between the first and the second year, up to 11 million for 24-25, 13 for 25-26, 15 for 26-27, and then $17.5 million in the 27-28 school year. So, again, as we review the budget assumptions, we took a very intentional look at projecting out the next 5 years. And so, it is a departure from how we've approached referendums in the past, but where we've been very, more or less said the message in the past that we weren't asking for everything that we needed. We're truly looking at the needs of the district and incorporating those into the ask this time around. So that is a little bit different, but not asking for everything we need has created greater need overall.
And again, it's still, for the most part, a continuation budget where we're projecting inflationary increases with minor adjustments in technology, curriculum, so really relatively minor increases. So for the most part, it's inflation, and yet we're budgeting an inflation amount less than what's projected in July, hoping that comes back down. But again, these are assumptions that we're trying to do our best estimate on. So we do have state aid, built in, as Angela indicated, a couple $100. If it's $100 more, that benefits it. If it's $100 less, that hurts us. So again, you're having to use some estimates, in terms of projecting out.
And this is an overview of expenditures. Often people will ask, like, what are you including and what is going to be paid for with this? So this is an operational referendum, so it's mainly our general operations. So what makes up our general operations is primarily 75 to 80% staff and benefit compensation. So we have, it's just a larger part of our budget. We require a lot of staff to educate a lot of students. So, there's not it's hard to get around that. So third in line is purchase services. So, those are the largest expenditure areas in our budgets.
And just to clarify, that would even be more, except some of our services are not directly managed. We contract out transportation, food service. If those were part of our costs, our salary benefit amounts would be higher. It's just we're paying somebody else to provide those services, so they incur that type of reporting cost.
And private school vouchers, we're often asked about private school vouchers as they are part of, we have to work these as a part of our budget. And this amount has grown extensively over the past 7 years, where it used to be $150,000 in 2016 has grown to $2.5 million. So right now, currently, of our $5.51, every per thousand, 77 cents is going to private schools. So the public schools are required to be to serve as a pass-through and to add that to our revenue limit so that that cost can be passed on to the taxpayers. Really, we bring the revenue in and we expend out the same amount. So, it would become a pass-through for them. So.
Yeah, so anyways, it's really important that we can't spend any money to promote this, okay? Except that when you recognize that the last couple of public forums, the community got engaged that were here in terms of sharing some of their own understanding in terms of both raising questions that we were able to respond to, but they also were offering, us feedback in terms of how important the schools are to the community and stuff like this, or they recognize it truly as a revenue problem. What are we doing about it? So one of the things, in fact, we just did during spring break is myself and two of our board members went down to the Capitol. The Wisconsin School Board Association every year has this event where you go down to the Capitol and meet with your legislators. So we were down there to make our case, in terms of how inequitable the system is. And I think we did a really good job. The challenge, though, once we elevate that voice, and you have a pie that's only so big to split up, and if you start thinking about raising the bottom, the only way you raise the bottom is lower or take away from the top. And that becomes some of the challenges. And so that's why it's also important, and something we'll continue even after this referendum, is to stay and continuing to get people together to go to our legislators to say, we got to fix the problem. Because this is not the way to run schools in Wisconsin in terms of where some districts are penalized based on their zip code. Tony.
Thank you, Jim, for bringing that up. For those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Tony Blastella, and I'm on the Board of Education here. But to Jim's point, this really, the situation that we're in today financially stems from that funding formula. And just to illustrate that, if you look at every other district in the state and how much money they get per pupil, we're in the bottom 4%, right? So what does that mean? 96% of other districts in the state get more funding per pupil than we. The state average is around 17,000. I believe we touched on that. We're around 14,000. If we were just funded up to that average, that'd be like extra 14 to 17 million per year. So it's important, the way that we're going about addressing this issue here at the board level. As you mentioned, we're really doing what we can to raise this issue with our legislators. It's really on them to solve it. I would encourage others in our community to reach out to them and, just speak to how unfair this is. This is really, Manitowoc's really gotten the shaft the last 30 years because of that formula. And it's not fair to our community and our kids and our staff. We've also taken this to the referendum, right? So that's the other area that we have within our control, is to work with local taxpayers to try to remedy this issue. So I just wanted to point out that, there's multiple ways to address the issue. Legislatively is, I think, the long-term answer, but, that's going to be a little bit harder to solve. But locally, we really need the support of the community. And just looking at, any community lives through the public school system. The stronger that system is, the more the kids are going to have success, the staff's going to have success, and Manitowoc's going to really be the destination district that we want. So just in summary, I wanted to really strongly reiterate my support for the referendum, and I strongly urge all of our community to stand up and do what's right in Manitowoc, because this is really needed if we're going to make this district as great as it can be.
Other comments? Yeah. You mind coming up here, and when I say that is, I should have somebody come up here. We're live streaming this, and I'm not sure if we've got many people on, but it would be beneficial for anybody listening in who might be able to get that type of feedback.
Sure, thank you. My name is Paul Clinker, a citizen in Manitowoc, and you've heard from the supervisor and a board member. I'm just a common citizen, and the reason I'm here is the revenue cap formula, the inequitable revenue cap formula. It's 30 years old, it's antiquated. Back in 1993 when it was set up, and the reason I'm here is because in 2015, there's a referendum in front of Manitowoc for $2 million. In 2016, Manitowoc was $1,500 under the average for the CAP formula, times the 5,500 students, that's $8 million that we should have had coming towards us if we were just at the average. So we're asking for a $2 million referendum, wouldn't have needed it. So I'm just here to say that if you hear any effort to change that formula, it's an Excel formula. I got it from Madison. It works. You can make it work, but it gets complicated because they put all these little tweaks in over the years. It's time to reset the bar, reset it so that it's fair with everybody. I know school districts around us have a higher per student number, and Manitowoc getting penalized every single year. It's not fair.
Thank you very much. You know, and going through that too, we're recognizing as we just look back at the last 5 years, and we're seeing these trends that are impacting. We're also seeing that we're losing students. You know, and so we're working to change that, but that's another loss, and it's happening partially because of the revenue stream that we have or don't have. You know, so all those things contribute in terms of what we're able to do to make, as Tony indicated, a destination point here, because we really believe we've got such capacity here to excel. And we made some changes this year with the strategic plan and the like, but this revenue source is critically important. Any other information anybody might want to share?
I'm curious, just from your perspective, if you guys can maybe comment on, you know, the challenges of knowing what we want to accomplish, what we task you with, frankly, as a board of education, and raising achievement and really getting our district back into the glory days, if you will, of what we used to be here. You know, how challenging would that be if this referendum were to pass? Can you speak to that?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's unfortunately, as Angela indicated, we're about $5.2 million short. And that was probably, you know, we were probably 3-4 million short back, and it's just gotten to this point in time. Really, when that referendum expires at the end of next year, that 4.3, it's up to 9.5 million. Okay. To reduce it just $4.1 million would be equivalent of 40 staff members. And you know, this is a people business, you know, in terms of this, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about aides, we're talking about, you know, many people that support the system. It would be devastating. We have not yet identified what we will be doing next. We'll immediately follow, we'll be, you know, discussing 2 pathways. You know, continue with our plan with those necessary resources, or how do we continue to move forward with significantly less until we can go up for another referendum. And that wouldn't be into next year, so we would have to immediately reduce the budget. We do fortunately have a substantial fund balance, but you know, you don't maintain operations out of the rainy day fund. You know, that's to help you with one-time expenditures or through a transitional period of time, but that can be gone very quickly.
And while we have the extensive need, there's also, you know, there is the factor that there's penalty too if we don't pass it. So, you know, if we do not pass the referendum, we would also face being frozen on the revenue limit for 3 years. And so that is an extensive, you know, extensive impact. So we would have to cut about another $1 million in addition to the $5.2 million. And so that, you know, if we come back for referendum the next year, you know, we could erase that with a past referendum, but that's one of those things where, you know, we have to take a risk and communicate this to our public, how important and critical this is. And it's important that we take this risk because of how important it is and how invested we are in the future of our community. So, you know, in addition to just having to cut our budgets, we would face that possibility as well.
And then obviously we've not really issued any contracts for next year. All this is on hold until we recognize what the referendums have. We indicated that inflation's up to 8% effective July when we're into a new school year. And yet we're only budgeting 5%. I mean, you know, we've not made any sustainable because we obviously need to know our resource base. So some of the challenges. The other thing, it's not the ideal situation to really manage, you know, the heavy maintenance costs of your facilities. You know, sometimes it gets to a point in time, particularly with our great but aging facilities, is that sometimes you're looking at actually a facility referendum. You know, and we're not there yet. We're just trying to do more in operations by adding a little bit more. It's not the ideal situation, but we know we can manage this in the next 2 or 3 years. But we still even have more issues that we're going to have. So So it's reducing staff, it's not offering compensation. Then what happens is we have turnover. Now you got to bring people back in and bring them back up. This would be devastating, for our school district. I mean, we will proceed because we have that commitment. But this is an unfortunate situation that we're in. This happened in Michigan. I had a similar experience. What caught the legislature's attention? A sizable school district closed its doors. So we're not doing it. You're either going to fund this or we're closing down. And that was an embarrassment to the state. And they threw the system out and recreated the new. We didn't want to get to that point in time. But that's what's happening when you create this disparity, between haves and have-nots, so to speak. So this would really be very, very difficult for us to work through. But we will, but it's substantial. We appreciate everybody coming on. It's it's again an opportunity. We live stream this. I'm not sure if we've got some people coming in. We've been talking to service groups. We've been meeting with PTOs, and it seems like more and more people are really understanding that this is a revenue problem and not the expenditure problem. But it's critical, in terms of that the community understands this in terms of what we have paid before the election. But it's also important that we follow up with this in terms of taking this fight to the legislators to the extent that we got to fix the system. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for calling. Yeah, I'll leave it all right there. One number off on the phone number. That was coming. Let me, is it one?